And we are live! Good evening, everybody! Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the bigger picture! Well, hey! All right, so we are going to be tackling our second class on Chayei Sarah. So here we go. Papers at the ready, slideshow at the ready, and we are going to get ourselves underway with what promises is to be excellent material. Let's just hope that I am up to the challenge of delivering it. And so with that in mind...
You will.
Oh, thank you so much. Here we go, guys. Week 2. If everyone able to see the screen, you can pin me, spotlight me, get me as big as you want me. And let's get underway. Obviously, what do we always do at the start of every session? We take a look at the structure. So we all know the score by now. So what is the structure of Parashat Chayei Sarah? Take us through it, guys.
Sarah's death and burial.
Oh, shall we see if he's right? Drum roll, please.
I wrote it down.
Oh, look at that. Spoiler alert. Sarah's death. Yeah, so if you pin Joe, if you pin me, then you should be able to see it better. Let me just try and do this as well. I'll spotlight it, and then hopefully it's a bit bigger.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, you
come up now.
Yeah, you just need to pin me, and then you'll be able to see it clearer. Okay, so thank you, David. First step is Sarah's death and burial, and the next topic that comes up.
Find wife for yourself.
Yeah, that's right. Time to find a shidduch for our boy Yitzchak. That's right. So, who do we find? We find, of course, Rivka. Third part of the parasha.
Abraham dies and mishpachology.
Abraham dies and the mishpachology, the B'nai Keturah. That's this part here. And then finally, we wrap it up with Yishmael, the death of Yishmael, to be precise. So if we remember, we talked about two very odd things in last week's session. We talked about how the name of the parasha, Chayei Sarah, seems to be completely illogical. Why? Because we said there's two elements to this. There's Chayei, the life of Sarah, right? Why are we calling it the life of Sarah if she has died? And if you remember, we spoke about the concept of kinyan, of acquisitions, the eternal purchases, that there is more going on with her death and the purchasing of the cave of Machpelah, which is to do with her life, her eternal existence, her eternal legacy. And the second element is why we've called it Sarah, because most of the parasha is about Rivka. It's not about Sarah. Hopefully, we can all recollect that in some way, shape, or form. And that will help us with this evening. And we had said that we'd asked the question, why did we not have the death of Sarah at the end of the previous parasha? Right? Because on a narrative level, if you recall, which Rashi told us about, he connected it to the Akedah, right? The end of Parashat Vayera was about the Akedah. And then we mentioned how there was a connection between the Akedah and Sarah's death. And Rashi had talked about it, and he had actually been coming off a midrash. Get a handle on your material. There we go. Those are our two questions. Why we call it Chayei Sarah if she died in the first verse, and why we named it after her if the bulk of the parasha is about Rivka. So anyway, so this is the midrash, or this is the source that Rashi was basing his commentary on when he was talking about the connection between the Akedah and Sarah's death. He had quoted a source which is here on the screen. All right, and the source tells us as follows: when Abraham came back from Mount Moriah, chara apo shel, and there's a Hebrew word here, which is the name of a destructive malach. And Shira's grandfather, who was big into Kabbalah, he would call this guy Sammy Boy. So Chara Aposhel Sammy Boy. The anger of Sammy Boy was kindled. So he is kind of, for all intents and purposes, I guess we could call him the Yetzer Hara. He was frustrated that Yitzchak had not actually been killed. Abraham had not actually gone through with it. So what did he do? He, this angel, this destructive force, went and visited Sarah, paid her a visit. And he said to her, have you heard what happened? And she said, no. And he said, well, your husband took your son up and sacrificed him as a sacrifice, slaughtered him on the altar. So the source here tells us that she begins to weep. And it says, Miyad hitchila bocha umeyalelet. Immediately she started to cry and wail. Bachta shalosh bechiyot keneged shalosh tekiyot. That she cried 3 times, corresponding to the 3 tekiyot. Tekiyah, corresponding to the 3 cries of the shofar. And shalosh yelalot keneged shalosh yevavot. And she gave 3 wailings, 3 howlings, connected to corresponding to the shalosh yevavot, the sound of the shofar, the shivarim, those groans that we might be familiar with from the sound of the shofar. Or maybe it wasn't the shivarim, maybe it was the tekiah, the teruahs, and it was right. So whatever she is crying, whatever wailing she is giving forth, the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is comparing it to the sound of the shofar, which should be a familiar sound to all of us. And then the source ends off, Ufarcha nishmata umeta. And at that point, from that wailing, from that crying, her soul departs and she dies. So Rashi had paraphrased that source. We're seeing that source in its entirety tonight because it's actually going to help us connect to tonight's content. And the connection is Rosh Hashanah, because this source is talking about her death and it's correlating and it's corresponding her crying to the sound of the shofar. And as we know, we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And so if this is the imagery that we are being led to examine, then there must be a theme of Rosh Hashanah coming through from this shock, from this big cataclysmic shock that Sammy Boy is visiting upon Sarah. He doesn't need to do this. He's frustrated that his plans have been interrupted, that Yitzchak hasn't actually been led to the slaughter, literally. And so he now is taking this out, it would seem, on Sarah. And as a result of that, she dies. And as a result of that, our whole beginning of our parasha has to take place. And it's not connected to the end of the previous parasha, to the story of the Akedah, even though we would think that this is all part of the Akedah narrative. No. We purposely, Chazal purposely have the story of Sarah's death at the beginning of Chayei Sarah. So the fact that it's at the beginning means that her death is linked to the Shidduch for Yitzchak. And the indication that they are linked, as we kind of brought out a little bit last week, is the fact that Sarah appears at the beginning of the parasha and also at the end, at the very end of our parasha. She appeared over here, but at the conclusion of the episode of the Shidduch, of the matchmaking, Vayaviyeha Yitzchak ha'ohela Sarah imo, vayikach et Rivka, vatahi lo leisha, vaye'ehaveha, vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. Yitzchak brings Rivka into the tent of Sarah, his mother. Didn't need to say her name. Could have said brought her into the tent of his mother. But the Torah mentions Sarah at the end, which indicates and alludes to the fact that we are wrapping up a theme here. If she belongs at the beginning and she belongs at the end, the Torah is clearly trying to tell us something. So she appears over here, and the verse says, Vayikach. He brings her into Sarah's tent, Vayikach et Rivka, and he takes her in this eternal way, in this eternal bond, which we were talking about last week, the kicha, the acquisition, the marriage at this point. And then, Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. The verse finishes off, then he was consoled. There's something very deep happening over here, which the words of the Torah are crying out for us to see and crying out for us to understand. Says the source in source number 3, talking about, nice little point there, that the taking of Rivka is somehow linked and causes and brings about the consolation over the death of his mother. So there's something deep at play over here which we need to understand. It's crying out for us to understand. Says Rashi on the words, taking her into his mother Sarah's tent. Says Rashi, he brought her into the tent and she became exactly like his mother Sarah. V'na'aseit dugmat Sarah imo. Becomes the exact example, the exact image, as it were, of Sarah. Kalomar, as if to say, V'harehi Sarah imo, as if to say, she is now taking the place of his mother. Shekol zman shesara kayemet, during her lifetime, the whole time that she was there, Haya ner daluk me'erev Shabbat. There were 3 miracles that occurred during Sarah's lifetime. And they went away with her death, and they came back again once Yitzchak married Rivka. Shekol zman shesara kayemet, as long as she was alive, Haya ner daluk me'erev Shabbos le'erev Shabbos. She would light a candle on Erev Shabbos, and it would remain lit from one Shabbos to the next. Uvracha mutsuya be'isa. And there was a blessing on her dough. Anything that she would cook, anything that she would, any bread that she would make, it would, there would be some kind of blessing, some kind of miracle attached to it. It says here a miraculous increase on the screen. I was under the impression as well that if she baked bread, then it would never go off. Va'anan kashur al ha'ohel, and a cloud was always hanging over her tent during her lifetime. Umishameta pasku, when she died, all of these stopped. Ukeshebat Rivka chazru, and when Rivka came into the picture, and when he brought her into the tent, and they became one, then these miracles reappeared. By the way, for those of you who might have an appreciation for this, and especially because we're going to be reading Parashat Pekudei this coming Shabbos, if you take a look right at the end of the book of Shemot, when the Mishkan is built, the tabernacle is built, and bear in mind, that's also called an Ohel, the Ohel Moed. So you'll notice right at the end over there that the cloud, the divine presence, comes down over the Mishkan, and that concludes the building of the Mishkan. We're not going to talk about that now, but it's just interesting, the imagery that we're talking about here, that there was a divine presence hanging over her tent, a divine presence hanging over the Mishkan. That's for you guys to go and do your own homework for. But it's where we are just needing to appreciate the blessings and the miracles that are happening. In fact, all of these 3 things are foreshadowing the Mishkan, if we pay close enough attention, because the bread, the showbread in the Mishkan and the temple remained fresh from one week to the next, and the menorah would remain lit until it needed to be relit again. So actually all of these miracles happened in the Mishkan. So this is a Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim. What is happening with Sarah's tent is foreshadowing what is going to be happening for the Mishkan. The depth of that will come to at another time, but it's just interesting to note it. So all of these things stopped when she died, and when Rivka comes back onto the scene, these miracles reappear, which is telling us that Chayei Sarah and the search for Rivka are somehow interwoven, and in a way that we need to be able to learn about and appreciate. Before we move on, do we have any comments or questions? Everything that I've said is so unbelievably clear and so obvious to all. Okay, so let's continue to go down the rabbit hole. It is a very deep rabbit hole this week, fellas and folks and ladies. So hopefully we will be able to do it justice. Let's just backtrack a little bit. Let's backtrack a little bit because there's something unique that's going on over here. You see, with Avraham, we don't hear about Avraham's parents. He left his parents. Lech lecha. He left. He went on his own journey. When Yaakov goes to find a wife, it's Rivka who sends him away, and it's he who goes away, and he goes and finds his wife, and he starts to build the family away from his parents, and it's only eventually that he comes back and re-enters the lives of his parents, so much so that he comes back to bury Avraham. So it's only Yitzchak, in the context of our forefathers, it's only Yitzchak that has his shidduch prompted by something to do with his parents, prompted by the death of his mother. So Avraham he's already with Sarah when he embarks on his journey, but nothing to do with the parents. Yaakov finds his wife, nothing to do with the parents. Yitzchak goes to find a wife, or a wife is found for him, and it's prompted by the death of his mother. So we need to understand, why is the death of his mother part of the journey? What essence is it trying to bring out? Why does it bring out the link with his mother? That's all very important for us to understand, because for it to happen this way, it must be connected. So, there's my little note at the end. Fine. So, to understand this, we need to have a look at another Rashi. When it told us before that he was comforted after his mother's death, Rashi tells us something quite essential. Derech Eretz. It is the way. It is natural. It is part of life. Kol zman she'imo shel adam kayemet, that whilst a person's mother is alive, karuch hu etzla, he is wrapped up in her. Umishemeta, and when she passes, when she dies, hu mitnachem be'ishto, he finds comfort in his wife. That's what the source tells us. That's what Rashi tells us. There is something about this which is entirely natural, right? This is going to make people, cringe, laugh, nod heads at each other. I don't know what it's going to do. And you'll see this isn't the end of it. But let's just go through this together. Let's have a look at what our sources have to say about this. There is something about Yitzchak's journey that brings out this reality. We have to understand why it's Yitzchak that brings out this reality. We need to understand also what this all means. Certainly on a superficial level, we might start going, aha, right? But this is what Rashi tells us, that it is natural, that there is some kind of bond shared between a mother and her son. And somehow the wife plays a part in this relationship as well. And let's be honest, it's gonna feel real, this one, guys. It's gonna feel real. So there's an earlier paradigm for all of this, an earlier shidduch which foreshadows this reality. And this is exciting, because where we're going is right back to the beginning, looking at everything with a new pair of eyes. There was a process for Adam and Chava, and the Torah told us something way back where, if you want to get your books ready, we're going all the way back to Parashat Bereshit. The Torah told us something about the relationship between a husband and wife, right back at the beginning with Adam and Chava. What did it tell us? Says the Torah in chapter 2, verse 18, right back at the beginning of Bereshit, Vayomer Hashem Elokim, God said, Lo tov heyot ha'adam levado. It is not good for man to be alone. E'eseh lo ezer kenegdo. I'm going to make for him an ezer kenegdo, a helper corresponding to him. It's not good for people to be alone. We are supposed to exist in the context of relationships. If you remember, hearkening back all those months ago when we were taking a look at Parashat Bereshit, oh, how it seems like a lifetime ago now, right? And we talked about how Adam interacted with all of the different animals to see if he was compatible with any of them. And he finds at the end of it that he's not compatible with any of them, but he's looking for the other half of himself. And so he doesn't have anything to connect with. So God puts him to sleep. He takes a part of his side, and out of that side, he forms woman. He forms Chava. And chapter 2, verse 23, Vayomer ha'adam zot hapam etzem me'atzmai uvasar mibsarai. He says, man says, this time it is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Lazot yikarei isha ki meish lukachazot. This shall be called woman, for from man was she taken. And then the Torah tells us in verse 24, Al Kain, Ya'azov ish et aviv ve'et imo. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother. V'davak be'ishto, and he shall cling to his wife, v'hayu levasar echad, and they shall be as one flesh. The Torah is teaching us a principle, a general principle. It abandons the narrative and it teaches us a general principle that for all time, a man should leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. Now, how different does this start to ring out for us with a different pair of ears and a different set of eyes, right? And this is especially strange because Adam and Chava didn't even have parents. They were the first people to ever exist. And yet, the Torah goes out of the way, peels back from the narrative to tell us that it is to be the way forevermore, the natural way of things that people should abandon, as it were, or leave home, flee the nest, and cleave to their spouse. Yeah? So, it would seem then that it is a necessary prerequisite. It is a necessary prerequisite which was brought out in Bereshit, but it's Yitzchak who finally brings it out in our story, in Chayei Sarah. So Yitzchak is the first person then to Ya'azov et aviv ve'imo ve'davak be'ishto, to actually leave his parents' home and cling to his mother. Sorry, Mum, my name is Yitzchak, by the way, just as a parenthetical coincidence. But there we go. It is the natural way to leave the family home and to cling to your wife and to start something new. So we need to understand why this is coming out still. Get to the point, Rabbi Nick. Why is this coming out in its full form, specifically through Yitzchak? But we're not going to get there yet. Oh no. First, we're going to delve into this a little bit deeper. Because when it comes to matchmaking, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to shidduchim, there is a time of the year which is often associated with love, with shidduchim, with bonding. And it's not Valentine's Day. Does anyone want to try and help us with which date in the Jewish calendar is usually associated with love, with matchmaking, with boys and girls finding each other? Says Martin again. 15th of Av. 15th of Av. Very good, Martin. The 15th of Av is a date that is associated with matchmaking. Very good. It's true, but it's not completely true. It's not completely true. There's another date as well. Says the Mishnah at the end of Masechet Ta'anit. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Lo hayu yamim tovim li Yisrael kachamisha asa ba'av, 15th of Av, uch Yom Kippurim. There were no days as joyous for the Jewish people as the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. For on those days, the Benot Yerushalayim, the daughters of Jerusalem, Yotzot Bichlei Lavan She'olin, they would go out wearing borrowed white clothes. Why would they go out wearing borrowed white clothes? Because if the rich would wear the fancy clothes and the poor would wear the poor clothes, then everyone would look at, they'd figure out who they want to marry based off what they were wearing. And that wasn't what this was about. So in order not to embarrass anyone, they would all swap up their clothes. And the girls would go out and they would dance in the vineyards. And the boys would go and check out the girls. And they would start to say, oh, hello, It's a bit like back in the old days, people meeting their husbands, people meeting their wives at the local dances. I'd love to say it's like that nowadays with the nightclubs and all the rest of it, but it's a slightly different world, isn't it? So back in the day, way back when, these two specific dates were inextricably linked with shidduchim, with matchmaking, with husbands and wives starting their courtship. And they would come out and they would dance. Now, this should strike our sensitivities. 15th of Av, okay, fine. Yom Kippur. We're going to have to understand this, guys. We're going to have to understand why it is that Yom Kippur would also be the day for checking out your wives. I mean, we definitely do see that. In fact, we have a couple in our community who met at Kenton Shul on Yom Kippur. So, there's obviously something magic in the air. But anyway, the bigger question is this. If we understand the cycle of the year, and I'm not saying we all do, so you'll have to take this as a bit of a given. But if we understand how the cycle of the year works, then it might strike us as a little bit strange that 2 days would serve the same purpose, especially when they're at completely different parts of the calendar. Okay, we might be familiar with Pesach being the time of freedom. We might be familiar with Purim and Hanukkah being times of miracles and all these different kinds of concepts that we might have a bit of familiarity with. But what we are saying is that there are 2 days in the year, completely different times of the year, which share the same actions and which share the same theme. And that's not normally the case. Normally, each day, each part of the year has its own content, has its own theme, has its own unique mitzvot. And yet, we are saying that these 2 days share the theme of shidduchim. And not only that, but they share the same expression of women going out to the vineyards. And that's not usually how the cycle of the year works. Does everybody understand that point? Even if we don't understand the depth of the cycle of the year, can we at least appreciate the unusual aspect to this? That we're saying that 2 days at completely different points of the year share the same expression and share the same theme. It's unusual. And so what we have to say emerges from here is that shidduchim is not associated with one date, quite literally. You definitely don't, people that say, oh, it was love at first sight. I knew there and then that I was going to marry them. Right? We don't really want people coming home engaged after one date, but that's not what we're saying. We're saying that shidduchim and the building of these relationships is not associated with one date in the calendar alone, but rather it's a process. And it's the process or the range or the time length, the time span from the 15th of Av taking us through to Yom Kippur, which are united through the concept of a shidduch.
Yeah, hold on a minute.
One sec, Josephine. Yeah, thank you. So, so what we're trying to bring out here, and I'll try and say this clearly, is that it's not two different dates weirdly sharing the same expression and underlying theme, but actually it's one theme that links these dates together, and there's a process that takes us from one to the other. And so if this is true, then the process from essentially the 9th of Av, but through the 15th of Av, taking us through Elul, taking us through Rosh Hashanah, all the way to Yom Kippur, there is a theme that has to do with matchmaking, with shidduch, with relationship building, a love that is being developed, and that's what we have to examine. And if we examine that, we'll start to understand what's going on with Yitzchak as well, which is why Rabbi Nick is taking so long to just get to the answer. But that's the way with the bigger picture. First, we zoom right out, and then we zoom right back in again. So let's try and do that together. In terms of our relationship with Hashem, there are different ways that we can define our relationship. Anyone want to try and throw out some of the different analogies, some of the different metaphors that we have for the way in which the Jewish people and Hashem interact? Anyone want to throw something out?
He's our Father.
I'm sorry?
He's our Father.
He is our Father. So we've got the father and the child relationship. Okay, that's one model. Any others?
The guardian.
The guardian. Okay, talk me through that a little bit.
Looking after us, making sure that everything goes as it should go.
Okay, I for all intents and purposes, I'll include that in the fatherly aspect dimension of our relationship. Any others?
When times are good and times are bad.
Okay, so what kind of relationship is that? What's the kind of the symbolism, the imagery to represent when times are good and when times are bad? Because you could argue that's also father and child. He remains our father even when we misbehave and even when things are going bad. So we've got the Avinu part of the relationship. And if we've got the Avinu, perhaps there's another word that's starting to ring in our ears.
Malkeinu.
Say again, Miriam.
Malkeinu.
Malkeinu. Excellent. He's also our king. Yeah. And that's what we say when we say Avinu Malkeinu. We're alluding to these two dimensions of the relationship that we have. He is our father. He's also our king. He is the creator. He is the ruler. He is the sovereign over everything that we are and everything that we have. And these are very important relationship models, and their origins go very, very far back. But there's another relationship as well that we're missing here. Go on, Lawrence. Finger on buzzers.
Obligation.
Yeah,
Obligation.
Oh, Lawrence, that wasn't what I was looking for.
No, it wouldn't be what you're looking for, but we have an obligation because we have the Shema, because we have to teach it to our children.
Okay.
So there's also, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
But I would put that under Malkeinu. I would put that under as his loyal subjects. We have responsibilities, so I'll put that under there. So David, go on.
He's our creator.
I'm going to put that under Malkeinu as well. I'm going to put that under King. Looking for another kind of.
For Yirat Hashem.
I'm not looking for Yirat Hashem. I'm trying to go with some kind of relatable relationship paradigm that we encounter, which we also use to compare with and to relate to Hashem. So we encounter parent-child relationships, and we have a parent-child relationship with Hashem. We encounter the concept in our lives of having a force, a power over us, and that's the Malkeinu. And Joe is going to ring in now with...
I don't know. Well, our Father is looking after us,
our King, we're in awe of him.
Okay, I'm looking for one more kind of relationship that we encounter in our lifetimes that we
Well,
also.
the one on the same level with siblings or with
Ooh,
fellow men.
you're so close there. You're so close with that.
Guardian, a marriage.
Allow me to share it with you guys. We also have a relationship, and you know, it's interesting because it's the one that really we don't pay enough attention to. It's the relationship of love, the relationship of love that we have with Hashem, which is manifested in our own relationships through the relationship that we have with loved ones, with our spouses. And we've talked about this before. We've talked about the kruvim, the cherubic figures on top of the ark, and one is Hashem and one is Bnei Yisrael, and they face each other and they embrace, and that's at the center point of everything in the entire physical world, is that image of Hashem and the Jewish people locked in an embrace. We have Shir HaShirim, we have the whole Megillah, Song of Songs, which is all about the relationship between a man and a woman, and it represents the Jewish people and Hashem. we have a Mishnah which tells us, by the way, that everything, all of the writings are holy, but Shir HaShirim is the holy of holies. It's all part of this same idea. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at this. So, oh my gosh, I'm terrible with these slides tonight. It's because I did them yesterday. Normally when I'm only doing it 5 minutes before the shir, I remember somewhat what I've put in there. But there we go. Too much preparation is not a good thing. So we relate to Hashem as a melech, as a king, as a father, as a child, but also in this paradigm of spouses. Plural is not spice. So what that means for us is that there is an underlying theme from the 9th of Av, where there is a problematic relationship, right? The 9th of Av was our darkest time. For those of us who are familiar with this, it was the date on which the Jews were sentenced to 40 years in the desert because of the sin with the spies. Yeah? It's the date on which we've had 2 temples destroyed. So the 9th of Av is linked to a problem in the relationship. And then we are fixing that relationship until Yom Kippur. And that is linked to this same thing, to the shidduch, to the relationship to spouses, to Bnei Yisrael and Hashem. So on a macro level, the Jewish people are attempting to come close with Hashem from the 15th of Av, as it were, this date on which for men and for women, they would go out into the fields. That was kind of like their shidduch time, their relationship time. And Yom Kippur was their relationship time. And something is happening in between. And on a macro level, what is happening in between is that the Jewish people are coming closer and closer and closer to Hashem. And that culminates on Yom Kippur, which is the day on which, the one day in the calendar, when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would be allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. It was the day on which there was that full bonding of the Jewish people with Hashem, right? So Yom Kippur, we can understand. It's a day of slicha and mechila. It is a day of forgiveness, a day of wiping the slate clean, a day on which we can fully embrace each other. That's the destination. That's the culmination. That's where all of this is driving towards. It's getting late in Israel, isn't it, Sass? Right? It's all driving towards that, but we don't understand what the 15th of Av is about. There are a few things that did happen on the 15th of Av. The Gemara talks about them. It was the day on which they were able to bury the dead in Beitar. It was the day on which the Jews in the desert realized that they were no longer going to die in the desert at the end of 40 years. Yeah, it got to Tisha B'Av of that 40th year, and they were still alive. Oh, but maybe we're going to die the next day, the 10th of Av? No. Okay, 11th of Av? No, we seem to still be alive. This went on until the 15th of Av, and that was the day when they realized, our punishment must have ended. our sentence must have ended. Anyone who's still alive at this point is going to be allowed to go into the land of Israel. All of these things are connected to the 15th of Av. But the Gemara tells us one other thing that's connected to the 15th of Av. We're getting closer to building the bigger picture here, guys. It's deep, it's scattered, but we are getting there. Says the Gemara in Ta'anit that on the 15th of Av and onwards, the strength of the sun grows weaker. Okay? From the 15th of Av, I guess that's the hottest or the strongest point of the year vis-a-vis the summer. And from that point, that's when the sun starts to weaken. Not only that, but it was the day when they would stop cutting wood to use in the temple for the altar. Okay, so there's something that's switching. There's something that's transitioning at the 15th of Av. And then the Gemara goes on to say, Mikan va'elech, from the 15th of Av and onwards, de Mosef Yosef, that one who adds will add, right? That which is added on will have more. And then it says, Udelo Mosef Ye'asef. And if you don't add on, Ye'asef. The Gemara says you will be gathered. And the Gemara asks, what do you mean you will be gathered? And Rabbi Yosef says, Tikbarei imei. What? This is all very, very strange. If you're confused, that's exactly where you need to be right now. It's a very cryptic Gemara that tells us that from the 15th of Av and onwards, something starts to transition. Something starts to change. If you add, then you will add. If you do not add, you will be gathered. What does gathering mean? It means, essentially, it means an early death. It means that a mother is going to bury a person. Rashi says that a person would die before their time. Tikbarei imei, that their mother is going to, usually the natural way is for a person to die after their parents. But this Gemara, this cryptic Gemara, is telling us that the 15th of Av is a transition point. Right? I'm sure there's tons of commentaries that talk about what all of this means. I'm just trying to bring out a little bit of a thematic connection over here without getting too much into the details, right? This Gemara is connecting 15th of Av, which is connected to relationships, which is connected to spouse relationships specifically, right? And it's connecting it to this concept of what Rav Yosef says, that a mother burying her child, a person cutting off their life early, whatever this means, it all seems to be dangerously close to each other. So without necessarily delving into the depths of the Gemara, we're trying to bring out this theme. We're trying to bring out this connection. Something is going on. Something is connected. The 15th of Av is the day when the girls go out and they find their husbands, and it's all to do with spouse relationships. And there's also something going on here that the Gemara and Rashi are connecting over here of a mother and a child, right? We've said that the two most significant relationships that we have in a person's life is that with your parents, although in a deeper way with a mother. And why is that? Let's think about that for a second. The mother starts her shift long before the father does, right? She's nurturing the child in her womb. She's feeding the child, taking care of the child. There's a much deeper physical connection between a mother and a child than there is between a father and a child. She gives birth to them. She's usually the primary caregiver. Okay, so that's our kind of primary relationship then. Not only is it a parent and a child, but it's actually the mother and the child. And the second is the relationship with a spouse, the husband and the wife. But what is the difference between these two relationships, between a mother and a child and a husband and a wife? The difference is, and this is why we're going to start bringing it back into Yitzchak now, the difference is that you can't choose your mother, but you can choose your wife. That's the difference between these two relationships. You don't choose your mother, but there is an element of choice by a spouse. And we spoke last time when we were talking about acquisitions and marrying and kiddushin, this concept of choice, and it makes all the difference in the world. And now let's start to try and bring it back into Chayei Sarah, bring it back into Yitzchak. Because what our Parsha is trying to bring out is that there is a relationship of choice at some point that takes the place of the relationship of birth, the relationship of the fact that you were born to a particular mother. So let's take it back to this Rashi. Okay? Yitzchak was comforted after his mother's death. Derech Eretz, it is the way of life, that when the mother is alive, they are enmeshed. That's the relationship that he knows. That's the relationship that he knows. He was born into that relationship. But when she dies, the relationship shifts its weight over to one's spouse. And so what Rashi is telling us, what we've been building up to all of this time, is that when Yitzchak's mother dies, there is an energy missing. There is a void created, and that gets filled by Rivka. But the relationships are totally different. One was the life gifted to him. One was the relationship gifted to him by the fact that he was born to his mother, and the other was the choice. The other relationship is a choice that a person has to make. And that is crucial because the spousal relationship has to be our choice, and the responsibility has to be on our shoulders. And if the spousal relationship has to be from our choice, then that means that the relationship with Hashem has to be with our choice. Has to be from choice. The responsibility is on our shoulders. And whatever we put into it, that is going to determine the strength of the relationship. You know, a child is automatically linked to the parent and only receives from that parent. But it's when you start to invest in the relationship that something starts to grow, that a process starts to take place. And so what emerges is that there's something from the 15th of Av to Yom Kippur that is essential, that we are supposed to take advantage of, that we are supposed to build towards, that we are supposed to actively take part in. That is what is connected. So let's try and just peel back again and just try and cement and crunch for ourselves what we're saying. The 15th of Av and Yom Kippur are connected by a theme. They're connected by the theme of shidduchim, by the theme of a spouse relationship. If it starts there, it's culminating over there. We're talking about Yitzchak. We're saying that something happens with the death of his mother, a void which is created, and Rivka starts to fill that void. The relationship of choice fills the void that is created by the death of his mother. And so what that means is that something builds throughout the year in our relationship with Hashem that starts at the 15th of Av, or that starts with where the relationship was broken, which is really the 9th of Av, and it builds towards Yom Kippur. And of course, we have to pass through one very significant day in between the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur, and that day is Rosh Hashanah. Now we're starting to wrap it all up. Now we're starting to join some dots, right? Rosh Hashanah is the day of V'nei Yom HaDin. It is the day of judgment. Oh, okay. Let's go, guys. It's the day of judgment. What does that mean? Judgment means that God focuses on us as individuals. He focuses on the choices we're making. And whatever we get in the coming year, pinpointed on Rosh Hashanah is based on our choices, is based on where our relationship is at. And whatever we deserve, we're going to get. And whatever we don't deserve, we're not going to get. But what's crucial is that it's all about you. The focus is on you. 1 second, I feel like I've missed a little bit there. Yeah. Oh, good. There we go. Look, even my slides support me. During this process is Rosh Hashanah. Very good. So Yom Hadin, Rosh Hashanah, is this day that focuses and, I guess, scrutinizes where we are in the context of our relationship, where we are in what we are doing. And so this transition from 15th of Av to Yom Kippur always goes through Yom Hadin, which means it always goes through the Midah of Din, the Midah of Gevurah. And who embodies the Midah of Gevurah?
Hesed.
Yitzchak. Okay. So we are transitioning from two types of... I feel like if I just go Yitzchak, then it will sound like awesome. And you'll be like, I have no idea what the heck is flying. But that's great. He said Rosh Hashanah. He said Yitzchak. He's got all the keywords in there. I'm just gonna go with him on this, right? It is a cryptic share. It is a cryptic content, but it's beautiful and all thematically connected and gewaldic. Anyway, so we're transitioning from two types of relationship with Hashem. Okay, the 15th of Av, the summertime. The summertime is the parental relationship. It's things that we are given. We start with Pesach, right? As we start to get into the summer months, we've got Pesach, which is the day when God just took us out of Egypt. He gave that to us for free. He takes us to Shavuot. We're given the Torah for free. Yeah? So the concept of this sun period, the summer, the sun being at its strongest, and then the 15th of Av being the time when it starts to get weaker again, that period of the year represents the parental relationship. Yeah? The sun gives and gives and gives. It gives us its light. The days of those, the holidays associated with this time period is all about God, what God gives us. That is the parent-child dependent relationship. We are receivers. It's pretty much one way. But then it transitions. I feel like I'm missing slides over here. Oh, look at that. But then it transitions to a relationship which is now two ways. It puts the responsibility on us. Whatever will be accomplished will now be accomplished by both of us. What I put into it and what Hashem puts into it. We are now an active member of the relationship by the time we get to Rosh Hashanah. So whether it's moving to the spousal type of relationship through the process of Shidduch, 15th of Av to Yom Kippur, the spousal relationship with Hashem, that is all connected. That is what is tying all of these things together. And you're supposed to get ready for that switch from dependent relationship to an active role through the midah of din. And we're saying that a person who does not take advantage of that transition, the Gemara told us, their mother will bury them. Which is another way of saying that you've never left that dependent reality. You're not in an independent stage of reality where your accomplishments are your own. If everything is just given to you by Hashem, in the same way that everything is given to you by your parents, that's not a healthy way of living. You can't break away from that. If you just... if you're living till your 50s and you're living at home and you're just, getting everything from your parents, you're not breaking away. You're not starting to kind of find that way for yourself. And you've not gone into that transitioned into the relationship of choice. And so that's one of the themes of Rosh Hashanah, is breaking away, is distancing from one's mother, so to speak. And we see this in a lot of the readings, because a lot of the things that we read on Rosh Hashanah is about the pain of a mother who feels distance from her child. What are some of the things that we read about? We read about Sisera, who loses her child. We read about the Akedah, and the follow-on from the Akedah is Sarah, who loses a child. We read about Rachel crying over her children. There's a theme of tikbarei imei, of a mother crying, mourning, weeping, burying her child, if we don't actually move into that reality of din, if we don't move into that chosen relationship. And Yitzchak is the embodiment of all of that. Yitzchak is the embodiment of din and of gevurah. And so we read about the Akedah. It's no coincidence. It's no coincidence that on Rosh Hashanah we read about the Akedah, which is the full emergence, as we've talked about, of the midah of gevurah, of judgment, of din, of this transition from a relationship of being dependent and being given to a relationship of choice. It's because of the fact that he personifies this midah that when he gets married, it will act out this transition. He will have to detach from the dependent relationship of his mother to connect to another woman out of choice and go through this orientation with regards to relationships. That's the intensity of what's happening. That's Yitzchak embodying this transition. Right? One always needs to be engaged in relationships, but the healthy process is to detach from a relationship with one's parents. Al kain ya'azov ish et aviv et imo. He has to leave his parents and make the primary default relationship his relationship of effort, the relationship with a spouse. It's all part of the system. It's all part of the way in which life is supposed to be lived. And what I get out of it is what I earn. That's the midah of din. What I put into a relationship, I will ultimately get out of the relationship as well. That's what ahava is. I give and I give and I give. And as a result of that, I feel this immense connection, this immensely powerful and deep relationship. Both parties have to put in. Both of the kruvim have to look lovingly and gaze lovingly at each other. The two sides have to be invested. And so that's what we have to transition through in terms of our own lives, in terms of the period of the cycle of the year from the 15th of Av to Yom Kippur. It's all connected. This is what Yitzchak puts into the world as well. So this is all built into the system right the way back from Adam. Adam gets created, and of course, Rosh Hashanah remembers the creation of man. Right, it's the day when Adam is created, right? And that's the choices that he now has to make. That's the relationships that he now has to make, connecting to Hashem, building a relationship with Hashem, building a relationship with a spouse, using our free choice, making those decisions in our world, fighting to have a connection with Hashem, a relationship with Hashem, to see Hashem in this world. It's all about what we are now putting our effort into. So I hope some of these very disparately disjointed thoughts help us to kind of paint a bit of a tapestry and understand a little bit of what we're saying. Just to kind of spill it out as well, there's a verse in Proverbs, if you seek it as if it were silver, if you search for it as if it were hidden treasures, and then the next verse, then you will understand the fear of Hashem and discover the knowledge of God. When you put the effort in, when you search for it, when you make that transition from just being given things like a mother gives to her child, and you start to put that effort in, then you start to see results. You start to build that relationship, whether it's a relationship with a spouse, whether it's a relationship with Hashem, the effort that you put in, the transition that one must undergo, either in their own lifetimes or in the calendar, it all builds towards this kind of idea, towards this ultimate relationship. And it has to be a spousal relationship in that you both have to give. but it's a relationship that you choose with our own decisions. So that significant transition that we experience in a microcosmic way is when you actually find that shidduch, when you actually find that partner. And from that point, you go from an existence of being dependent on someone and being a recipient from someone, and you change the focus of your life and you move into a reality of a relationship of choice, which is exactly what is happening in Chayei Sarah. It's exactly what is happening from the point at which Sarah dies and Yitzchak enters into this new relationship, this relationship of choice, and he is the one who brings it out because he is Din, because he is Gevurah, and so he is the one that has to bring it all out. And he started that in Vayera, but he takes it a step further in Chayei Sarah. And he has to break away, therefore, from his mother and recognize that he needs to shift from this relationship of dependency to a relationship of choice. And that is the foreshadowing, that is the prototype, that is the Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim for all of us. It teaches us that for all generations, that you have to come into a spouse-like relationship. That has to be the primary relationship. It's not healthy to go through life always relying on your parents. And we see this in reality because we see more and more, right? The people that start that process later and later, it can create an unhealthy balance. So that all comes out through Yitzchak, that all comes out through Chayei Sarah, that all comes out through the death of Sarah on the one hand, but culminating with the entrance into her tent at the end of it, which brings about the miracles that Sarah had left behind with her death. Rivka brings those things back out. And that's the transition from the dependent relationship to the relationship of choice. And that's why the realities of Sarah come back into the context of Yitzchak, but it's now in a relationship of choice. And so once we have accomplished that, once Yitzchak has accomplished that, this whole phase of history comes to a close. The Midah of Chesed is wrapped up with the death of Avraham and Yishmael. Yitzchak activates this concept of Al Kain Ya'azov Ish, of leaving the parental relationship, transitioning into a relationship of choice, and that will, please God, take us into some exciting new topics when we get into our next series of Parashat Toldot. So that's where we end for this evening. As I said, I didn't find this tremendously easy, and it could well be that you guys haven't as well, but we're going to stick around for some questions. But to all of you watching on Facebook and on YouTube, stop watching on Facebook and YouTube and come join us on Zoom for the after party. And that's our next series, please God, the end of March into the beginning of April. Exciting times as we start to talk about Yaakov and Esav, and that will be our next series, please God. But for now, we're going to take questions over here on Zoom. And to all of you watching elsewhere, we wish you a wonderful and meaningful evening. Thank you for joining.